Thank you for joining me in this webinar. My name is Natalie Hull and I'm a teacher on the team at TAFE Digital. Today we're looking at Unit CHCCDE003 Work within a Community Development Framework, and we're focusing on the Portfolio Project 1 assessment. The assessment number is LA025629. And today's webinar is part 1 of 2 webinars that's looking at completion of this assessment. TAFE New South Wales acknowledges Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples as the traditional custodians of the land, rivers and sea. We acknowledge and pay our respects to elders past, present and emerging of all nations. And I'm presenting to you today on Ewan land, which is down the south coast of New South Wales, and I'm in the beautiful location of Mollymook Beach. So in this part 1 session today, we're going to read through the assessment task so you gain a really good understanding of what's required. We're going to look at where you can locate resources to assist you in completing the assessment task, and also look at some databases and information on where you can identify a community group to base your assignment on. So let's look at the assessment instructions. Remember, it's always important to read the instructions. Don't go straight to the questions, because the instructions really build the bigger picture of what it is that you need to do within the assessment. So it says here, the task is to research a local community group. And when you're reading assessment instructions, look for key words. So this is a research task. To complete this task, you're required to undertake research and analysis project based on a community group to establish their experiences in the community, including any potential concerns and or issues they are facing. So basically, you're going to locate a community group. You're going to research information about them. You're also going to do some analysis about the information you find, and what you're going to be identifying is their issues, their needs, and then it says here, in addition, this research will look at possible strategies and or potential resources that could be used to enhance community development outcomes. So then considering what could be some strategies to address some of those issues. The identified community group will need to be a formal, recognised group within the local community. So you're going to need to identify a community group, not a community organisation. 2 very different things. And hopefully by the end of this session, you're going to be really clear about what a community group is and where to find specific community groups that you could research and base your assignment on. And you're given a few ideas here. It says it could be a neighbourhood group, it could be an online group, a cultural group, or a special interest group. But we're going to pull that apart as we work through the assignment and give you some examples. Where possible, you should have access to a community development plan. Quite often the local council will have a published community development action plan that you should be able to locate via an internet search, and you will be able to find this kind of information, which is going to be valuable in completing this assignment. Information about the group should be readily available via an internet research. So if you're struggling to find information on the group, then might be best to choose another group. So, it might take a bit of research to identify, but once you get the right group, then it'll make the assignment much easier. So the planning is important. There's a note here at the end. You should be able to contact the organisation or a representative of the organisation via email or a written letter. It's best to check that they have a member willing to meet you early in the project. So most of these groups will have a lead person that takes inquiries and responds to emails or phone calls. So you might be wanting to contact that particular person to gather more information to be able to complete your report. So let's have a look at where to find the resources to help you. If this is your first unit, you'll go up to the top of the OLS, you'll click on My Course, My Units, and then in the drop-down box you'll select My Units. And when you do that, it'll take you to the Unit Overview page, and in the Select a Unit box where the arrows are, you'll make sure that you have the name of this unit in the drop-down box there. And if you just underneath that, if you click on Resources, it will take you to the page where you'll be able to access all the learning resources. And this is what the page looks like. And you have a range of different resources. So the first one is basically your textbook. If you click on the blue link that has the unit code and says learning resource, it's your textbook for the unit. You can download it as well. I've screenshot the front page. Basically, when you click on the link, you'll open it up. You can download it onto your computer. You can print it off so that you've got a hard copy, and you can highlight information as you're reading through if that suits your learning style better. The link underneath is the library guide. It's basically your online library, and there's going to be lots of really good reading material in there that's going to help you with the assignment. Then there's some additional resources, some videos and articles on understanding community development, and lastly a really good quick webinar that one of the teachers recorded that explains community development and the different approaches. So make sure you have a look at those. If you click on the LibGuide, it brings you to this page, and there's some really useful resources under the Topics tab. You can see the arrow pointing to the Alcohol and Drug Foundation Community Hub document. It's really worthwhile having a look at that because there's some good case studies in there as well. One of them is related to a youth advisory group and the Mandurah peer-led AOD education project. But if you have a look at that, it really describes the work of the youth advisory group. So have a look at that. And then just further down the page, the document Building Sustainable Community Ideas for Inclusive Projects. It has some case studies as well. And if you go to page 10, you'll read a case study about a community garden. So a group of people living in government housing apartments. Have a look at that, and also read the following pages after the case study because it highlights what the issues were for that group and then what the strategies were that they developed, because this is what you're going to be reflecting on when you're completing your assignment and when you're researching a group. You're going to be reporting on their issues and needs and then reporting on some strategies and solutions. So I think having a look at these is going to help you in completing your assessment tasks. And here's that case study I mentioned. So make sure you read it because it's really going to help you get a good understanding and have an example of the type of group that you might be researching. I thought I'd share with you some examples of my experience of working as a community development worker and give you 3 examples of community groups the type of community groups that you could be looking for. And one was a resident action group, and you'll find there's a lot of these groups, might be across your region. So I was working as a community development worker in an area called Mount Pleasant, was the 2749 postcode. And in this area there was a lot of conflict in the community because the community was made up of a range of people from very different socioeconomic backgrounds, because the area had a local government housing estate, but there was also a private housing estate, and then there was another estate made up of large blocks of land, 5 acres. So, you know, you had people that were building homes and living on their very large properties, and then down to people living in very tiny townhouses on a social housing estate that had a lot of issues. And one of the issues that resulted from that was that those different groups didn't want to associate with each other, and they weren't accessing the services that were available to them in the community. For example, the local neighbourhood centre. No one really went there. So the resident action group was formed, and it was made up of people living in those very different estates who did want to interact with others, did want to improve their community. And so this group was set up, and then we worked with the group to listen to their concerns, hear what their needs were, hear what their aims were for the community, and develop some strategies to address those. And one of the strategies was a family fun day. But this particular group continued to meet for many years and address other new issues that came up in their area. Another example is a youth action committee, and there's also lots of these in the community, particularly if you go and speak to your local youth centre. In fact, community centres and youth centres are great places to go and have a chat with the staff there to identify specific groups that they might be working with. And even local schools set up youth committees as well that may address particular issues and work with local youth workers. So do a bit of research and see if there's a youth action committee in your area. Another example was a grief support group, and once again these type of groups are formed once an issue perhaps has occurred. And in this local area that I was working, it was a regional area just on the outskirts of Sydney, and there was a major car accident that involved the death of 2 young children, which really affected the family and affected the community. And when we went to work with the community, we realised that there was actually no supports for parents who had lost a child. So the grief support group was set up, and we located other people in the community who had experienced the loss of a child through, you know, a range of different reasons. And these parents came together and started to meet on a local, on a regular basis. And we involved a psychologist to also provide some support and education to them. So these are the types of groups that you might be able to locate in your community to be able to base your assignment on. So where will you locate the groups in your community? My first tip for you is when you're doing your search community groups that are volunteer based, because then you're going to be on the right track. A community organisation is not a community group. So do not base your assignment on a community organisation. You need to find some volunteer groups. Local councils are the perfect place to identify them because councils promote their community groups and interest groups, and they also provide small funding grants. It might be $250 up to a couple of $1,000 to support a local community group, get a program up and running, or support them to meet around the issues for their particular group or community. You'll also find on council a social plan, or they might call it the strategic plan, or a community engagement plan. And those plans are good places to identify what the needs are of the community and also identify needs of vulnerable groups, because you really need to be looking for the groups that have higher needs in the community, like youth groups and older people, or people from different cultural groups, Aboriginal groups. There's a range of community databases as well, which you'll be able to locate, and council promotes those community databases as well. Local neighbourhood centres are great places to go and have a chat with the staff and ask them about the community groups in your area. So interest groups might be a community garden group, which we've mentioned before. The men's shed. The men's sheds are groups of men that meet regularly, and there's many of them that are meeting throughout the country. So you could base your research on one of those groups. You could look for groups like breast cancer support groups. So there's a range of different groups in the area that are focusing on health issues. Other community directories. Here's a good example of a directory that identifies support groups for people with mental health issues. So have a look at One Door, because there are a lot of different support groups on that database. And you can also look for groups through social media platforms like Facebook or Instagram. So let's recap on the session and the tips for getting started. So step one, make sure you read through all the learning resources, and particularly some of the ones that I've pointed out to you, so that you gain a real understanding of what community development is and how groups are formed to address specific issues for those groups within the community, which also aims to empower community members. Once you've really got your understanding there, then you're going to research an already established community group to be able to complete the assignment. And you'll use those databases and some of those tips on where to research that I've given you today. And then finally, step 3 is to watch the next webinar before you start answering the questions, because I'm going to address each question one by one to clarify exactly what's required in answering each of those questions successfully. And remember, if you get stuck at any time, you can contact the teaching section, and one of us teachers will be more than happy to help you. You can call us on 029 715 8299, and we're available Monday through to Friday from 9 AM to 5 PM. Or you can send us an email direct from the Contact a Teacher page on the OLS, or you have our address there on the screen in front of you. And thank you for joining me.